They say silence is deafening, but nothing prepared the courtroom for the weight of Usher Raymond's voice as he took the stand. All cameras barred. No fanfare. No stylist in sight. This story is far from over. The trial is just getting started, and every day brings new revelations. If you want to stay informed and ahead of the headlines, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We're covering the courtroom, the fallout, and what this means for the future of hip-hop. Don't miss a beat. Subscribe now. This wasn't the Usher we knew from the music videos or the red carpets. This was a man haunted. A survivor stepping back into the house of ghosts. He began quietly, almost apologetically, but it didn't take long before the tension shattered the room's oxygen. "I thought I was going to live my dream," he said. "Instead, I learned how to disappear." The room went completely still. Usher described how, at just 14 years old, he was placed in Diddy's care to grow into the industry. Back then, it sounded like mentorship, a career move, a golden ticket. Instead, he said, it was like being flown straight into a world with no breaks and no boundaries. Late nights, strange guests, rules that changed by the hour. And always the unspoken motto, don't ask, don't flinch, don't leave. He told the jury about waking up to strangers in the house, about watching private gatherings from a distance, understanding intuitively that some rooms were never meant for kids. But the worst part, there were no adults, just power. And whatever that power wanted that night. He paused. And then, with his voice cracking, he admitted something he'd never said publicly before. "I signed something I didn't understand, so I wouldn't talk." A hush fell over the room. Because now, it wasn't speculation. It wasn't tabloid buzz. It was under oath. In a federal courtroom. A world-famous artist laying bare how he'd been silenced at 14 with an NDA. An NDA. For a child. The prosecutor asked if he felt safe in that house. Usher didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the floor, then back up. "I felt watched, trapped, groomed, though I didn't have that word yet." That single sentence changed everything. Because for the first time, the courtroom wasn't just looking at a defendant facing trafficking charges. They were looking at a timeline of damage that began decades earlier. The kind that doesn't go away with therapy. The kind that changes the trajectory of someone's entire life. Usher admitted to suffering from night terrors, to carrying shame for not speaking out, to years of blaming himself for what he witnessed and endured. "I stayed quiet," he confessed, "because I thought I had to. Because if you speak, you disappear." And that's when the jury got a glimpse of the system behind Diddy's empire, not just a network of logistics and compliance, but a psychological trap. A world where stars were made through obedience, where questions got you labeled difficult, and where silence was the currency of survival. The defense tried to interrupt. They objected, called his claims vague, tried to reframe his experience as a young artist under pressure. But the judge waved it off. "He's describing the environment you say didn't exist. Let him finish." And finish he did. Usher dropped a moment that will echo through this trial until its final breath. He recalled the first time he tried to speak up to a music exec, not naming names, but made it clear they were part of Diddy's close network. He mentioned the late-night activities, the guests, the chaos. The exec's response? "You're in now. Be smart. Keep dancing." Those 4 words made the courtroom collectively tense. Because now we weren't just talking about Diddy's behavior, we were talking about an entire culture that enabled it. Usher ended his testimony with a direct statement to the young artists watching from afar. "You don't owe anyone your silence, no matter who they are. And no promise is worth your soul." And with that, he stepped down. The courtroom didn't applaud, it couldn't. But the energy shifted. Even the jurors, stone-faced for the past week, couldn't hide it anymore. You could see it in their eyes. The foundation of Diddy's defense had cracked. And it wasn't because of a viral video or a leaked photo. It was because a man finally said what he'd been terrified to say for 30 years. And right after Usher stepped off the stand, the prosecution requested entry of 2 early NDAs, dated 1996 and 1997, believed to be signed by minors under Diddy's management program. Both NDAs, redacted for privacy, included language that waived the signatories' right to speak about behavior observed in private spaces, unofficial gatherings, and unauthorized recordings. Let's pause. Minors. Signing documents waiving their right to speak about unauthorized recordings. That's not mentorship. That's coercion with a contract. And as the courtroom slowly absorbed that, the judge issued a powerful statement for the record. Let it be known, the law will not be used to shield criminal behavior. Not today. Boom. That's the gavel sound of a legacy cracking in real time. So where do we go from here? With Usher's testimony locked in, the floodgates are wide open. The prosecution has announced they intend to bring 2 more former protégés to the stand before the end of the week. Speculation is running wild, but names like Mario, Bow Wow, and even Chris Brown are being whispered in the hallway like thunderclaps. Because it's no longer about what Diddy did at parties. It's about what he built, what he normalized, what he used his fame to silence, and who finally has the courage to say, no more. We've crossed a threshold now, and there's no going back. Because word had already started to leak before court was even in session. A former house manager from one of Diddy's lesser-known Miami properties, often referred to in the industry as the Pink House, was set to testify. And what she brought with her wasn't hearsay. It was floor plans, security logs, guest itineraries, and a hard drive. Yes, a hard drive. Not from a phone, not from a laptop, but from the actual surveillance system inside the house. The witness, a woman in her early 40s who had worked for Diddy from 2011 to 2016, looked visibly nervous but determined. She didn't waste time with niceties. The first words out of her mouth? They called it the trap house. That's what the drivers, assistants, and chefs called it, behind his back, of course. The judge looked up immediately. The courtroom froze. Because in those 3 words, the tone shifted. This wasn't about a rogue celebrity anymore. This was about an operation. A destination with a nickname known by staff, protected by security, and hidden from the public. A place with its own internal rules. She described a property just outside downtown Miami, remodeled multiple times to obscure its original blueprint. She testified that certain rooms were built without permits, and that there were 2 basements, one of which had no official door, just a trapdoor behind a mirrored wall in the guest bedroom. And this is where it gets worse. Because on the hard drive, footage, time-stamped, with names, guests being escorted in, phones being confiscated, NDAs being signed on tablets at the door. She recalled one specific night when 6 young women, all of whom appeared under 25, were brought in at once and held in a waiting area for nearly an hour before Diddy came down from upstairs. She was told not to make eye contact, not to speak unless spoken to, just serve drinks and leave. But here's the catch, she never signed an NDA herself. Why? Because she was hired through a third-party company and forgotten in the shuffle. Her words, not mine. So she kept the hard drive when she left. Not out of spite. Out of fear. She didn't even watch the videos until years later when the lawsuits started rolling in. When I saw Cassie's name come up again, she said, I knew I had to come forward. Because I remember her. I remember what she looked like after certain nights. And then she dropped the quote of the day. It wasn't a party house. It was a machine. Boom. From there, the prosecution put the drive into evidence. And while the court didn't play full clips in front of the jury yet, they did allow still images to be shown. Blurred faces. Timestamp overlays. Interior angles that made your skin crawl. One from above a bed, one from a hallway corner aimed at the bathroom door. The implication: surveillance not just for safety, but for control, for leverage. And while Diddy sat there, in a charcoal suit, silent, unreadable, his team scrambled. Because that footage, it wasn't just from one night. It spanned 5 years. 5 years. And guess what was found in the drive's metadata? A folder titled VIP_review_clips. Not security, not house cams, not surveillance. VIP review clips. The courtroom wasn't just stunned. It was horrified. And that horror deepened when the witness handed over a laminated schedule she found months after quitting, tucked between kitchen manuals. It listed guest initials, arrival times, dietary restrictions, and something called break intervals. When asked to explain, she simply said, "That's how long guests could be expected to last before they needed to be replaced or rotated out." It's a sentence you don't forget. Ever. The prosecution rested their case for the day after that. Because really, what else needed to be said? The court was adjourned. Reporters sprinted out the doors. Diddy was escorted out the back. And now, everything is on the table. The trap house is real. The videos exist. And the quietest witness so far, a house manager, invisible for years, may have delivered the most damning blow yet. But here's the chilling part. The hard drive wasn't the only one. The witness admitted under cross-examination that there were multiple backups, stored off-site, possibly still accessible. And one of them, labeled with a date that matched the night Kid Cudi's car exploded. Yes, that night. The courtroom is darkening. The witnesses are no longer just artists or insiders. They're the people who built the house, literally and figuratively. And they're tearing the roof off with every word. The next morning, the courtroom was at full capacity. Not a single bench empty. Word had spread. The Miami property hard drive was just the tip of a much darker, more insidious iceberg. And today, the prosecution promised something even heavier. A former talent manager, once deep in Diddy's machinery, now ready to detonate the myth of mentorship. She walked in quietly. Early 50s. Hair pulled back. No makeup, no performance. This wasn't a publicity moment. This was revenge wrapped in composure. The prosecutor introduced her as a former executive consultant for artist development at Bad Boy-affiliated properties from 2002 to 2010. But she corrected that title under oath. "I was the one who wrote the NDAs. I was the one who handed them out. I know who signed what, and I know why." You could hear jaws hitting the floor. Because up until now, we've heard about NDAs from the outside, artists trapped, assistants muzzled, guests silenced. But today, we got testimony from the woman who built the wall of silence. She walked the jury through what she called standard onboarding for house guests and performers. She used air quotes when she said onboarding, as if even she knew how grotesque it sounded in context. And then she pulled out a stack of contracts. Originals. Many were signed with initials only. Others had full names. Some had pseudonyms: Starling, Raven, Eliza Blue. Each NDA contained clauses that, frankly, left the courtroom stunned. There were entire sections about behavioral expectations after midnight, image confidentiality in all situations, emotional volatility clause, and even a chilling footnote titled Touch Without Trauma Policy Overview. That last one, the judge had to have it read aloud twice. Nobody could believe it. She then explained what that phrase meant. In plain English, if someone became upset or emotional due to physical interactions, they had already waived the right to assert emotional distress. Let that sit. Victims, some underage, were signing documents that pre-blamed them for how they would feel. She went on. These contracts weren't for parties. They were shields. They made sure no one could talk if anything went wrong. Or if something went very, very wrong. Then came the kicker. She testified that Diddy had final edit approval on every NDA before it was handed out. Not legal. Him. And sometimes, he made notes. One in particular, next to a clause about room surveillance, he wrote in the margin, "Add clause about footage ownership. If they ask, tell them it's for security." It was signed SC. That wasn't just paperwork. That was intellectual property weaponized as a muzzle. And this woman, she'd had enough. She ended her employment in 2010, but only after burning her own bridge with a move that would come back into play today. She refused to sign a retroactive NDA. Diddy's team tried to slip into her exit package. Why? Because I saw what happened to the girls who did. She described one woman who tried to come forward, someone who had worked events for nearly 4 years. A week after threatening to break her NDA, she was sent a cease and desist. Her apartment was mysteriously broken into, and she ended up hospitalized after a fall that no one could explain. The witness choked up. She didn't fall. She was pushed. Just not physically. And now, over a decade later, that same woman had reached out and was scheduled to testify in the coming week. So yes, it's still escalating. The prosecution submitted these NDAs into the court record under seal, but not before highlighting 3 clauses to the jury, including one that stated, "The host may alter or extend the event experience at their discretion. Participation in any such alterations is deemed voluntary by presence." Voluntary. By presence. That's not consent. That's coercion by invitation. And when asked why she finally came forward now, the witness didn't hesitate. "Because the system I helped build is being used to hurt people, not protect them. And I'm done keeping it quiet for a paycheck." Applause isn't allowed in courtrooms. But if it were, that line would have gotten a standing ovation. Even the judge leaned forward, scribbling notes with a kind of intensity we hadn't seen since opening statements. Then came the cross-examination, and Diddy's team made their fatal mistake. They tried to discredit her by pulling up her past tax records, implying she only came forward for financial motives. They pointed out she once filed for bankruptcy in 2015, that she hadn't worked in the industry for over a decade, that she lived quietly now. Her response? "Exactly. I left your world. And I only came back because it refuses to stop hurting people." Boom. She left the stand with her head held high. And Diddy? He looked like someone was twisting invisible screws into his chair. Every word of hers landed like a hammer on his fragile PR coffin. And then, in one final move before recess, the prosecution requested to subpoena the third-party firm that handled NDA digital signatures. Apparently, metadata shows documents signed after guests had already left the premises, with timestamps altered to match intake logs. Fake NDAs. After the fact. Forgery. Fraud. Intimidation. Now the trial isn't just about what happened in bedrooms, it's about what happened in backrooms with legal pads and digital timestamps. This is bigger than sex trafficking. Bigger than racketeering. This is about an empire built on fear, documents, and silence, and every page of every contract is about to be peeled back in public. If you thought the Miami trap house was disturbing, brace yourself. Because what entered evidence today has the courtroom spiraling into an entirely different kind of darkness, one cloaked not in velvet ropes and industry parties, but in gospel, faith, and fear. The prosecution opened today's session with a single question. "Mr. Combs, do you recall sponsoring a church-based artist retreat in Georgia from 2010 to 2015? Boom. Nobody had heard about this yet. Not the media, not the defense. Diddy visibly tensed. His lawyers exchanged frantic glances. Because what followed was arguably the most morally gutting testimony in this trial yet. A young woman, going by the pseudonym Alicia, was called to the stand. She was quiet, measured, wearing a cross necklace so tight it might as well have been armor. And then she spoke the words that changed the mood of the room entirely. He told us we were being baptized into a higher level of artistry. But what he meant was submission. She described how she had been 17 when she was selected for what was advertised as a faith and music master retreat, a Diddy-backed gospel outreach program where selected youth from choir communities across the country were flown to a private estate outside Savannah. Parents were told this was a once-in-a-lifetime mentorship experience with industry icons. But Alicia said the house was something entirely different. It was quiet. No press. No cameras. No phones. They told us we had to focus fully on our spiritual calling. But we weren't allowed to leave the house. She described isolation. Men with clipboards and earpieces. Nightly reflection sessions that involved strange rituals. Music turned up so loud she couldn't hear herself think. Blindfolds during trust exercises, and one-on-one time with mentors that, in hindsight, she now describes as psychological grooming. And yes, Diddy was there. He didn't stay every night. But when he did, everything got more performative. He'd come in like a preacher. He'd talk about sacrifice, about letting go of shame, about releasing our bodies to the process. By this point, people in the courtroom were visibly shaken. The judge had to call for a 5-minute recess so several jurors could collect themselves. Because this wasn't Hollywood excess. This was spiritual manipulation weaponized against teenagers. Alicia testified that after one of these sessions, she was made to sign a covenant agreement that, to this day, she'd never seen a full copy of. She said it was a 10-page form printed on parchment-style paper with gold-embossed lettering. At the time, it felt like a ceremony. Looking back, it was a consent contract for something I hadn't even experienced yet. She claims she was touched without consent, that she woke up in unfamiliar clothes, that when she tried to leave, she was told her parents had already signed off and she'd be in violation of the retreat terms if she broke protocol. The prosecution then submitted a copy of an actual covenant letter found during a 2023 search of a storage unit linked to Diddy's charity foundation. The language was deeply unsettling. Phrases like, "Release the body for industry rebirth," "Sacrifice the self to be truly seen," "The body is a tool, the spirit is the price." What is that? Gospel branding or cult psychology? The worst part, the church that helped recruit. According to Alicia's testimony, local church leaders were involved in nominating and vetting the youth selected for these retreats. And not just any churches, some of the biggest black megachurches in Atlanta and Houston. She named names. She showed church flyers. And she stated, flatly, they knew. Maybe not the full truth, but they knew something wasn't right. One of the flyers was entered into evidence. It featured Diddy and Bishop T.D. Jakes, side by side, promoting new voices, renewed spirits. Alicia confirmed it was the event that led to her being selected. Now, to be clear, no direct accusation has been made against the bishop in terms of misconduct. But the implication? A stunning level of complicity. At this point in the day, the defense had one job: damage control. They tried to spin the event as a mismanaged leadership camp. They argued that Alicia's memory may be clouded by trauma, that her timeline was fuzzy, and that she couldn't provide a physical copy of the contract. But their efforts flopped, because the prosecution then dropped another bombshell. A recorded phone call between two retreat coordinators, caught in a 2022 wiretap, discussing how the girl from Georgia was asking questions again. They said, and I quote, "Get ahead of it. Send her something. Or pull her NDA and throw her in a lawsuit." That's not mentorship. That's a system designed to silence people when their faith has been exploited. And when the judge asked if any other witnesses had similar experiences, the prosecution confirmed 3 more are waiting. all tied to the retreat program. This isn't just about the music industry anymore. This is about a parallel structure that used religion, power, and promise to break people before they even had the words to describe what was happening. So where are we? We're now looking at grooming minors under the guise of spiritual retreats, manipulating contracts with religious language, using churches as shields for recruiting vulnerable youth. And Diddy? He sat through it all in silence, blinking slowly, jaw clenched, like a man realizing the walls are closing in faster than his lawyers can patch the cracks. This isn't a trial anymore. It's an autopsy of an empire. Drop your thoughts below. Should faith-based youth programs involving celebrities be federally regulated? Should churches face legal action for facilitating access to minors under false pretenses? And how do we protect the next generation from being exploited in the name of mentorship? Smash that subscribe, because the next testimony could expose the spiritual trafficking machine the industry doesn't want you to see.